The stars outside the Vanguard's windows were almost gone. Lyra Wren stood alone in the main science deck, staring at the dark space beyond the glass. Only a few distant points of light still burned. The rest had already vanished. She turned back to her screen. Data streams scrolled down in front of her. Numbers, charts, signals. She had checked them over 100 times. Each time, they told the same story. The universe was dying. Not in millions of years. Not in centuries. Now, her hand tightened on the edge of the console. She didn't want to believe it. But the facts were clear. Space itself was breaking apart. The walls between stars were collapsing. Wormholes were snapping shut one by one. Even time felt slower here on the edge of everything. Lyra knew why it was happening. Long ago, when she was younger, she had worked on a project called Pulse. It was designed to harvest energy from the deep fabric of space. Back then, they thought they had discovered the future. Infinite power. No limits. No more fighting over fuel or dying planets. She had believed in it, but they had been wrong. Every pulse they fired had torn tiny holes in the structure of the universe. And they hadn't stopped. Others had copied the technology. Entire fleets used it now. The holes grew larger over time. The universe had started to fall apart, and no one noticed until it was too late. Lyra rubbed her face with both hands. She had hoped to find a way to stop it. For years, she had worked in silence, chasing theories, running tests. But tonight, the last piece of data had arrived. A distant collapse wave was moving toward them. It had swallowed hundreds of star systems already. Nothing survived its path, and it was getting closer. Lyra stepped back from the console. Her throat felt tight. She had failed. The universe could not be saved. She turned toward the door. She had to tell Commander Daxon Rill. He was the leader of the Vanguard fleet, the last great fleet of human ships. If anyone could order the fleet to stop, it was him. But she already knew Daxon. She had served under him for years. He was proud, strong. He hated giving up. He still believed they could fix this. He still ordered the energy pulses to keep running, trying to hold space together just a little longer. Lyra walked down the cold metal halls toward the command chamber. Lights flickered above her head. Power failures were common now. Even the ship itself felt tired, like it knew the end was near. She passed crew members who barely looked up. People were quiet these days. No one spoke of the stars. No one planned for the future. They all felt it, the slow closing of the universe around them. She stopped outside the command chamber doors. She closed her eyes and took a long breath. He won't believe me, she thought, but I have to try. The doors slid open with a low hum. Commander Daxon Rill stood at the center of the room, hands behind his back, looking out the front window. His gray uniform was perfect, his posture sharp. The command officers stood around him, working at their stations in silence. Lyra walked forward. The doors closed behind her. Daxon turned to face her, his expression hard to read. "Dr. Wren," he said. "Report." Lyra swallowed. She took one more step forward. Her voice came out low and steady. "I have the final results," she said. "The universe is collapsing faster than we thought. There's no way to stop it." The officers paused. The room felt colder. Daxon frowned. He stepped closer. "Explain," he ordered. Lyra showed him the data on her pad. She explained what she had found. She told him about the collapse wave, about the dead star systems, about how their energy pulses were making it worse. When she finished, she looked up. Daxon said nothing for a long moment. Then he let out a slow breath and shook his head. "No," he said. "We can still fix this. We just need more time, more energy. We push the pulses stronger. We hold the wave back." Lyra felt her heart sink. "Sir," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, "we've already made it worse. Every pulse pulls the collapse closer. We have to stop. We have to shut everything down." Daxon's jaw tightened. "Giving up is not an option," he said. "We fight to the end." Lyra felt like shouting, but she held herself back. She knew he wouldn't listen now. She had to find another way. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. The doors slid shut behind her with a heavy sound, like the closing of a final door. Lyra knew the real fight was just beginning. She had to find a way to reach the fleet. She had to tell the truth to everyone, not just Daxon, because the end was coming. And soon, there would be no more time left. Lyra stood outside the command chamber, her fists clenched at her sides. She had delivered the truth. But once again, Daxon had turned his back on it. She walked quickly through the silent corridors of the Vanguard. The air felt heavier than before. It was as if the ship itself could sense what was coming. Crew members passed her without speaking. Some carried tools. Others moved crates of equipment. All of them kept their eyes down. No one dared ask questions anymore. Fear had become normal here. Fear and silence. Lyra turned into the science deck again. She sat at her console, pulling up the fleet's activity records. Dozens of energy pulse towers across the fleet were still active. They burned through more energy every hour, feeding into the same broken plan, trying to push back the collapse. It was useless, worse than useless. Every pulse only made the walls of space weaker. Daxon refused to see it. Lyra leaned back at her chair, staring at the ceiling. She knew she couldn't go to him again. He had made up his mind. He would keep pushing forward until there was nothing left. She couldn't let that happen. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than guilt. She felt purpose. If Daxon would not speak the truth to the fleet, she would. She reached for her communicator and connected to an old private channel, one she used to share with her old research team, long before things had fallen apart. She wasn't sure anyone would answer. A few minutes later, a face appeared on her screen. Dr. Eli Wren, old friend, former energy engineer. His face looked older, thinner, worn down by years of running from collapse after collapse. Lyra, he asked, surprised. I need your help, she said. She explained everything. The data, the collapse wave, Daxon's refusal to stop the energy pulses. Eli listened in silence, his face growing paler with every word. I knew it was bad, he said quietly, but this is worse than I thought. We have to reach the fleet, Lyra said. We have to tell them the truth. All of them. Eli hesitated. You know what Daxon will do if you do this, he said. I know, Lyra said, but it's our last chance. Eli nodded slowly. I'll help you. By the end of the day, they had pulled in 5 more trusted voices from a fleet. Scientists, engineers, crew members who had quietly doubted Daxon's orders for months. Together, they worked through the night, building a fleet-wide broadcast message. Lyra's voice would carry the truth to every ship, every station, every crew member. When a message was ready, Lyra stood in front of the recorder. She took a deep breath and spoke. This is Dr. Lyra Wren. You deserve to hear the truth. The universe is collapsing. We caused it. And now, every energy pulse we fire pulls the collapse closer. Commander Daxon believes we can still stop it. But the data is clear. We cannot stop it. We can only make it worse. If we continue, we risk destroying the last stable regions of space. We must stop. We must shut everything down. This is not surrender. This is the only way to let what's left of the universe die in peace. You have a right to know. The choice is yours. Lyra pressed send. The message went out to all ships in the fleet. The response came fast. Some ships went quiet, powering down their systems. Others demanded answers from Daxon. Tension rippled through the fleet like a wave. By morning, Daxon's voice filled every speaker on the Vanguard. This is Commander Daxon Rill. Dr. Wren's message is a lie. We have not failed. We have one final plan that can save the fleet and hold the collapse back. Anyone spreading fear and disorder will face punishment. We will continue the energy pulses. We will not give up. Lyra's heart pounded. She knew what was coming next. An hour later, armed officers came to her door. Daxon had officially labeled her a traitor. But when they reached her room, she was already gone. Lyra had hidden deep inside the lower decks. Eli and the others were with her, moving quietly through maintenance tunnels. The fleet was splitting apart. Some obeyed Daxon. Others began shutting down their ships, siding with Lyra. A quiet civil war had begun, not with weapons, but with truth and lies. Lyra knew the hardest part was still ahead. She had lit the spark. Now, she had to keep it burning. She whispered to herself in the darkness. We're not done yet. The fleet began to change. It didn't happen all at once. It started in small ways. A single ship here, a small crew there, silent protests in the form of powered-down engines and darkened decks. Some captains quietly ordered their crews to shut off the pulse towers. They didn't make any announcements. They didn't try to fight. They just stopped. Lyra watched it happen from the hidden tunnels below the main decks. Her small group had spread out across the Vanguard, listening to crew chatter, intercepting internal reports, and gathering updates from other ships. Every hour, more people seemed to hear her message. Some believed, some didn't. But cracks were forming in Daxon's control. Lyra knew Daxon wouldn't let it go on for long. One day, she heard the news she had feared. Daxon had ordered a fleet-wide lockdown. Every ship was to report its status. Any crew found shutting down systems without orders would be arrested for disobedience. But something else happened, something even Daxon had not expected. Many ships refused to answer the lockdown call. They went completely silent. The Helios, the Pathfinder, the Orion's Gate, 3 of the largest ships in the fleet, shut down all external communication. No one knew if their crews were still alive or if they had simply chosen to disappear. Fear spread fast. Lyra gathered her group in one of the old storage bays. It was cold, dimly lit, and smelled like old metal. Eli stood beside her, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "We're losing time," he said. "The more Daxon pushes, the more people freeze up. Some are too scared to choose a side. They just shut everything down and wait." Lyra nodded. "That's still better than helping him push the pulses." A young engineer named Mara spoke up. She had joined them 2 nights ago after her captain ordered the engines to power down. "He's planning something," Mara said. "I heard rumors of the upper decks. He's preparing a final experiment. Something big." Lyra's breath caught. She had feared this. "He's going to risk the entire fleet?" she whispered. Mara nodded. "I think so." Lyra stood and paced the floor. The walls felt like they were closing in. "If he tries one more pulse," Eli said, "it could tear the last stable space apart." Lyra knew they couldn't let that happen. They had to stop him, but how? Daxon still controlled the command center, the fleet's communications, and the remaining pulse towers. If they tried to fight him directly, they would lose. He had soldiers. He had weapons. Lyra had none of that, but she did have something Daxon didn't have anymore. People who had stopped believing in him. People who were already shutting down their ships. She turned to Eli, her voice low but steady. "We need to reach the captains who've gone dark. We need to find them. If enough ships refuse to follow Daxon, we might force him to stop." Eli Puronet. "Ow! They've cut all contact." Lyra looked at Mara. "You used to work in the communication relay decks, right?" Mara nodded slowly. "I know a back channel. It's old, not used anymore. But if the other ships left it open..." "It's worth a try," Lyra said. They moved quickly, slipping through maintenance shafts and power tunnels, staying off the main paths to avoid patrols. Every step felt heavier than the last. When they reached the relay deck, Mara went to work. She powered up a small console, using old access codes. Static filled the speakers. For a moment, Lyra felt her hopes slipping. But then, a soft pulse signal blinked on the screen. "It's the Helios," Mara whispered. They left the channel open. Lyra leaned in. "This is Dr. Lyra Wren. If you can hear me, we need to talk." There was a long pause. Then a voice replied, "This is Captain Vance of the Helios. We're listening." Lyra explained everything. The collapse wave, Daxon's final plan, the danger it would bring. She asked them to help, to stand together, to refuse Daxon's next command. By the end of the call, Captain Vance agreed. He would not follow Daxon. One by one, other ships answered the same way. The Pathfinder, the Orion's Gate, the Zephyr, the Starfall. 5 ships, then 8, then 10. Lyra's group stayed in the relay deck all night, making contact with captains across the fleet. Some were afraid, some were angry, but more and more agreed to stand down. By morning, nearly half the fleet had gone dark. No more engines, no more pulse towers, silence. But Daxon wasn't finished. Lyra's heart sank when the fleet speakers came alive again. "This is Commander Daxon Rill. You have forced my hand. We will fire one final pulse, stronger than any before. It will stabilize the collapse and save the fleet. All ships, prepare to receive energy alignment orders. Anyone who refuses will be treated as enemies of humanity." Lyra felt the air leave her lungs. She knew that final pulse would destroy everything. She turned to her team. We have to stop him, no matter what it takes. Because if they didn't, the next pulse would be their last. Daxon's order echoed across every deck of the Vanguard and throughout the entire fleet. The message was clear. There would be no more discussion. No more time to argue. The final pulse was coming, and it would either save them or destroy what little remained. Lyra stood in the relay room, her heart racing. The quiet tension around her felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She turned to Eli. He's really going to do it. Eli nodded slowly, rubbing his hands through his thinning hair. If he fires that pulse, the collapse could reach us in minutes. Lyra clenched her fists. We can't let him get that far. Mara stood up from her console. If we confront him in public, in front of the captains, maybe we can still turn the fleet against him. Lyra hesitated. The idea felt risky. If they failed, Daxon could have them locked away, or worse. But if they stayed hidden, the fleet would follow his orders. She knew it. She took a slow breath. We'll call a final council meeting. I'll challenge him face to face. Within 2 hours, the fleet council gathered in the command chamber. The room was packed with officers, scientists, and crew leaders from all the major ships. Daxon stood at the center, tall and calm, as if he had already won. Lyra entered from the far side, with Eli, Mara, and the rest of her group close behind. The council members turned to watch her. Whispers filled the air. Some looked hopeful. Others looked afraid. Daxon's voice cut through the noise. You're wasting time, Lyra. Lyra walked to the center of the room. She faced him directly. If you fire that pulse, you will tear the last safe space apart, she said. Her voice was steady but loud enough for all to hear. You will destroy us all. Daxon crossed his arms. We've heard this already. Your fear doesn't change the facts. We have one shot left. One final pulse. It can hold the collapse back long enough to save the fleet. You can't hold it back. Lyra's voice rose. The universe is breaking apart because of the pulses. Every time you fire one, you rip it further open. You can't fix what's already broken. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Daxon held up his hand to silence them. He stepped closer to Lyra, lowering his voice. You would have us sit here and die quietly? He asked. Is that your great plan, Doctor? Lyra swallowed hard but didn't look away. No, I'm saying we stop making it worse. We stop trying to control what can't be controlled. We accept the truth and let go, while there's still something left to let go of. Daxon turned to the crowd. She calls it letting go, he said coldly. But it's surrender. It's giving up on everything humanity has built. I won't do it. I won't let our people drift into the dark without a fight. Lyra stepped forward, standing beside him now, facing the council. She looked at the faces in front of her, faces she had known for years. Friends, rivals, survivors. Look around you, she said quietly. The stars are gone. The systems we called home are gone. The universe is dying. We've done all we could, but now, every action we take makes it worse. We cannot win this fight. The only choice left is to stop fighting. The room went still. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, Captain Vance of the Helios stood up. His voice was quiet but firm. I stand with Dr. Wren. Then Captain Riva of the Pathfinder stood. So do I. More captains rose. The Orion's Gate. The Zephyr. The Starfall. Half the council stood behind Lyra, but the other half remained seated. Some looked down, unsure. Others turned to Daxon, waiting for his lead. Daxon's jaw tightened. This is a mistake, he said. A deadly mistake. He turned to his officers. Prepare the final pulse. We launch at full power. Gasps filled the room. Daxon turned toward the exit, motioning for his security team to follow. Lyra knew she couldn't let him leave. Not this time. She stepped into his path. No, she said softly. I won't let you do this. Daxon stopped, staring at her like she was nothing but a barrier in his way. You can't stop me, he said coldly. Lyra didn't back down. She turned to the crowd again. Who will stand with me now? The council hesitated. Then Eli stepped forward. Then Mara. Then others. Dozens of crew members stood, moving between Daxon and the exit. Daxon's guards raised their weapons, but they didn't fire. The room was too crowded, too tense. For the first time, Daxon seemed unsure. He glanced at the faces surrounding him. His hand twitched at his side. Then the floor shook. The walls vibrated. Alarms blared. Everyone turned toward the front window. A wave of collapsing space, black, twisting, silent, rolled toward them. It had already swallowed a nearby star. Daxon's face drained of color. He turned back to Lyra. "How long?" he asked, his voice cracking for the first time. Lyra swallowed hard. "Minutes. Maybe less." Daxon closed his eyes for a moment. The pride in his face broke. He lowered his head and whispered, "Stand down." The council froze. The officers lowered their weapons. No one moved for several long seconds. Then Daxon spoke again, louder this time. "Shut down the pulse towers. Power down all systems. Tell the fleet, we're done." Lyra felt her knees weaken, but she stayed on her feet. It was over. She looked around the room. No one cheered. No one smiled. But they had made the choice. They had stopped. And now, all they could do was wait. The fleet had gone silent. The pulse towers were shut down. The engines stopped humming. Lights across the Vanguard dimmed until the ship felt like a hollow shell. Power systems dropped to their lowest levels, just enough to keep life support running. It was the first time in years that Lyra heard nothing but the hum of the air circulating through the vents. No alarms. No engine rumbles. No energy waves tearing through space. She stood at the observation deck, looking out into the dark. The stars that remained were barely more than fading pinpricks of light. A faint cloud of collapsing space drifted not far from the fleet, dark and slow-moving, like a silent storm creeping across the universe. Behind her, Eli stood quietly, arms crossed over his chest. Mara sat on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at nothing. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. The council had left the command chamber hours ago. Daxon hadn't spoken a word since giving the order to stand down. He had walked out alone, leaving the room in silence. Lyra hadn't seen him since. The fleet floated in darkness, waiting. Lyra felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had fought to stop Daxon, to stop the final pulse. She had done what she believed was right. But now that it was over, the silence felt heavier than she expected. What now? What would the fleet do next? Drift forever? Wait for the universe to tear itself apart? No one had an answer. Lyra pressed her hand to the cold glass, watching the slow-moving collapse wave outside. It hadn't reached them yet, but it would. Sooner or later, it would swallow everything. She turned away from the window. "I have to speak to them," she said quietly. Eli looked at her. "The council?" "No," Lyra said, shaking her head. "The whole fleet. All of them. They deserve to hear the truth one last time." Lyra walked to the central communications room. No one stopped her this time. The halls were quiet. Crew members sat in small groups along the walls, whispering softly or staring into space. Some looked up when she passed, but none spoke. Mara and Eli followed her. No one else came. When she reached the broadcast console, she sat down and placed her hands on the panel. Her fingers trembled slightly. She took a deep breath and started the recording. "This is Dr. Lyra Wren. We have shut down the pulses. We have done all we can. I know you're afraid. So am I. But I want you to know, this was never about giving up. This was about stopping before we made things worse. This was about accepting the truth, even when it hurt. The universe is ending. We cannot fix it, but we can choose how we face the end. Not with more damage. Not with fear. Not with more destruction. We face it together, in peace. To every ship, to every crew member, I thank you. We did all we could. And now we let go." She ended the message and sent it to every ship. Lyra sat back, letting out a slow breath. It was done. Eli placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a small nod. Mara leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. They waited. Hours passed. The fleet remained still. No one powered their engines back on. No one fired any pulses. The ships floated like ghosts in a dying sea. And then, the wave moved closer. Lyra felt the ship tremble. The observation deck lights flickered. A deep, low vibration filled the air, like the universe itself was groaning under the weight of its own collapse. People gathered near the windows, watching in silence. No one tried to run. No one tried to fight. They just stood, side by side, staring into the void. Lyra stood with them. The wave crept closer, slow but steady. A twisting wall of blackness, swallowing light, swallowing space itself. It moved without sound, without warning, without care. Lyra felt a tear slip down her cheek. She wasn't sure if it was fear or relief. Daxon appeared beside her. His uniform was wrinkled. His face was pale. His eyes, once sharp and full of command, now looked tired and human. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Lyra nodded to him softly. Daxon nodded back. The crew stood together, watching as the wave drew near. And Lyra realized something. Even though they had failed to save the universe, they had not failed to save their humanity. For the first time in a long time, they had stopped running. They had stopped breaking what cannot be fixed. They had accepted what was beyond their control. And in that moment, they were free. The ship shuddered again, lights dimming even more. There was no turning back now. All they could do was wait together. The wave was closer now. It filled the sky beyond the observation windows, black and endless. It was hard to tell if it was moving fast or slow. It felt like it had always been there, waiting just out of sight. Now, what had come to take the rest? Lyra stood among the crew of the Vanguard. No one had left their post. No one had tried to escape. They all knew there was nowhere left to go. Around her, people stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, watching. No one cried. No one screamed. There was only a heavy, quiet acceptance. Daxon stood beside her again. He hadn't left since he came to the window. He didn't give any more orders. He didn't try to argue. The weight of command had finally left him. He looked just like anyone else now. Another person watching the end come closer. Eli and Mara stood behind them, quiet as ever. The rest of Lyra's small group had gathered as well. Some leaned on the walls. Others sat on the floor. A few held hands. It felt strange, but there was a kind of peace in the air, cold and quiet, but real. The fleet's lights flickered again. Systems were failing one by one. Life support held steady, but gravity felt weaker now, as if the ship itself was getting ready to let go. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were steady. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't shaking. The fear was still there, but it didn't control her anymore. She turned to Daxon. "We should tell them," she whispered. Daxon didn't answer at first. His jaw tensed, like he didn't trust his own voice. Finally, he nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. They walked together to the central broadcast room. No one stopped them. No one followed. The halls were nearly empty. Those who remained had already gathered near the windows, waiting. The control console still glowed dimly when they reached it. Lyra sat down again, her hand resting on the dusty surface. She looked up at Daxon. He nodded once more. Lyra opened the broadcast line for the last time. She spoke with a steady voice, soft but clear. "This is Dr. Lyra Wren. To every ship, to every crew member. The time has come. The collapse is here. We cannot stop it. But we have done something greater than saving ourselves. We have chosen to stop harming what we cannot fix. We have chosen peace. I am proud of every one of you who made that choice. You have shown what it means to be human, not by fighting to the last breath, but by knowing when to stop, when to let go, and when to face the end with courage. Power down your ships. Sit with your crews. Watch the sky one last time. We walk away now, not in fear, but in peace." She ended the message and leaned back in her chair. Daxon stood beside her, staring down at the console. He reached out slowly and placed his hand on the console next to hers. "I should have listened sooner," he whispered. Lyra looked at him. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. She simply nodded. Together, they left the room. Back on the observation deck, the crew had grown silent again. Some sat together, holding hands. Others stood alone, eyes locked on the dark wave that now stretched across the entire window. Lyra moved to the front of the crowd, standing by the glass. Eli and Mara stood beside her. Daxon stood on her other side, hands at his sides, head slightly bowed. The wave began to move faster, the edges of space twisting and bending as it reached toward them. The Vanguard shuddered once more, lights flickering for the final time. And then everything grew still. No alarms, no engines, no lights. Only the faint glow of the stars beyond, the last light they would ever see. Lyra pressed her hand to the glass and closed her eyes. In that moment, there was no sound, no fear, no pain. Just silence and peace. The fleet had done all it could, and now they waited for the end. The Vanguard drifted in silence. No hum of engines, no glow of systems. The great ship, once full of light and noise, now felt like a giant, floating shadow in the dark. The other ships hung in the empty sky alongside them, dark and still. Dozens of ships, thousands of people, waiting together for the end they could no longer outrun. The collapse wave stood right in front of them now. It stretched across the sky like a dark ocean, endless and alive. It shimmered with strange shapes, ripples in space that bent the stars like reflections on water. Every few minutes, another star blinked out. One by one, the universe faded. Lyra stood at the observation deck. She hadn't moved in hours. She felt like part of the ship now, as quiet as the walls around her. She turned her head and looked at Eli and Mara. They were sitting together on the floor nearby. Eli had his arm around Mara's shoulders. Both stared out the window, not speaking. Daxon stood farther back. He had barely said a word since the broadcast. He had lost the fight, but in losing it, he had done the right thing. Lyra had seen in his face when he finally gave the order to stop. Pride had left him, but something else had taken its place, peace. Lyra pressed her hand against the cold glass. She remembered Earth. She hadn't seen it in over a century. It was gone now, ruined long before the collapse ever reached it. But she remembered the blue sky, the green forests, the oceans. She remembered the wind on her face when she was young. She let out a soft breath. This is it, she whispered to herself. The wave inched closer, slow but steady. The crew stood together. No one tried to leave. No one moved. They had made their choice. This was the end they had accepted. Lyra turned to the people beside her. She didn't need to speak. They all understood. One by one, people sat down on the floor, leaning on the walls, or holding hands with those closest to them. No one was alone. Lyra lowered herself to the floor, leaning her back against the window. She looked up at the dark sky one last time. The wave was so close now, she could almost feel it. She closed her eyes and let her head rest back against the glass. She felt Eli sit down beside her. Mara sat on her other side. Daxon joined a moment later. The four of them sat together in the quiet dark, breathing the same air, sharing the same final moment. No one cried. No one spoke. The ship shook again, softer this time, like a whisper passing through its old metal bones. And then, the light outside began to fade. The last stars blinked out. The sky turned black. Lyra felt her breathing slow. She held on to that last, quiet breath. And she smiled. The fleet drifted into the dark. No sounds, no light, no fear, just peace. The last choice had been made. The last step had been taken. And in that silence, humanity had let go.